Gotham is a looming presence on our pages and screens. Whether as the nameless New York analogue of the early detective comics, or the sunny West Coast harbor city of the 1960s Batman serials, the Art Deco lines of the animated series, or the film noir grit and monochromatic palettes of Matt Reeves' 2022 vision. Batman's many writers have created a world that highlights the tensions and contradictions of city life. Glittering skyscrapers like Wayne Tower are visible from the derelict housing of the Narrows. The sophisticated bars and casinos of the Iceberg Lounge lead people, inescapably, to the darkness of Blackgate and Arkham. With these extremes of rich and poor, beauty and ugliness, creativity and depravity, Gotham symbolizes every city. This resonates with some of the very oldest human stories and gives these melodramatic comic book adventures the potential to speak to and maybe even transform how we live together. By far the most recognizable iteration of Batman's hometown is the industrial Gothic monstrosity that first appeared in Tim Burton's definitive 1989 Batman. The production designer, Anton Furst, told Time magazine that their goal was to make Gotham the ugliest and bleakest metropolis imaginable. A city run by crime, an essay in ugliness, as if hell erupted through the pavement and kept going. Anton Furst's Gotham was heavily influenced by the city in Fritz Lang's expressionist masterpiece, Metropolis, and its inspiration, that other archetypal city in literature, Babylon. Like Gotham, Babylon is every city. It represents the inequalities of every human society, decadence and desperation, slavery and exploitation, the evil of corrupt institutions. And this enduring image has its origins in history. When Jerusalem was besieged, its people were led into exile in Babylon, the largest city in the world, a place of skyscraping buildings, the center of a huge military and economic empire, and at its heart, a tower, an enormous pyramid, a shrine built to honor prosperity in the form of the god Marduk. In captivity in Babylon, the people told and retold the stories that became the seed of much Judeo-Christian literature. They told the story of the Exodus, their ancestors' rescue from a land of slavery and pyramids and empire. They told the story of the first humans being exiled from a rural paradise, and the story of the first murderer who kills his brother, then builds the first city. The multiplication of violence on the earth goes hand in hand with the development of the cities. This urban antipathy reached its height in the story of the Tower of Babel, a political satire about the foundations of Babylon, not as a praiseworthy human endeavor, but as arrogant, self-aggrandizing, a rebellion against God. The stories of Babylon, like the stories of Gotham, don't conclude that doing away with the city will do away with problems, but rather they acknowledge that complex social systems lead to complex social problems. If someone trips and falls in a village or small town, they will likely be picked up, maybe given a cup of tea. But if someone falls in New York or London, that is much less likely to happen. Because there is busyness. There is the bystander effect. With everyone else looking on, why should I be the one to help? There is danger. Is this a trick to steal my wallet? People get lost in cities. People can live their lives surrounded by thousands of people and never speak to anyone. In cities, people can get desperate. In Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, it's not some criminal mastermind that kills Bruce Wayne's parents. It's a low-level thief, letting a crime of desperation get out of hand.
The Depression hit working people like Mr. Chill hardest of all. His crime was appalling, yes, but it was motivated not by greed, but by desperation.
Sure, I was desperate, like a lot of people back then, but that don't change what I did.
The city itself has created the circumstances for crime. And that's before you even talk about corruption.
You care about justice? Look beyond your own pain, Bruce. This city is rotting. They talk about the Depression as if it's history, and it's not. Things are worse than ever down here. Falcone floods our streets with crime and drugs, preying on the desperate, creating new Joe Chills every day. Now, Falcone may not have killed your parents, Bruce. He's destroying everything that they stood for.
Ancient cities often claim to have been founded by divine warriors. But in the biblical story, it's evil spiritual forces that partnered with human rebellion to build the cities. Like those stories of Gotham that hint at occult influences in the city's foundations. It's almost as if the fabric of the city itself is infected. Like evil and death are worked into the very design of the city. In the biblical story, those dark spiritual forces continue to lurk behind the corrupt political powers of the world and behind individual actions. It's a response to the ethical and legal question of personal responsibility. To what extent is an individual responsible for their actions? And to what extent should the circumstances and forces that shape them be taken into consideration? In the Babylon stories, personal transgressions and structural corruption are part of the same messed up, sinful system, feeding and amplifying one another. This is the same conclusion drawn in the stories of two iconic Batman villains. Selina Kyle in 1992's Batman Returns, and Arthur Fleck in 2019's Joker. We follow the story of their transformation from ordinary citizens to crazed criminals. And in both cases, they are presented as the inevitable product of a society like Gotham. Selina Kyle, the stereotype of a downtrodden woman, overworked and underpaid, is pushed to the edge by a misogynistic and abusive boss, and finally finds a kind of liberation as the criminal Catwoman. Arthur Fleck, a troubled mind, overwhelmed by a complex and aggressive world, finally lashes out fatally at his tormentors. Neither are exonerated of their crimes. Arthur Fleck bears the responsibility of pulling the trigger. Selina Kyle is culpable for her actions. And yet, the stories make clear that in a city such as Gotham, these occurrences are inevitable. If Selina Kyle and Arthur Fleck had made different choices, somehow not succumbed to the pressures of the world they live in, someone else would have. It's the city that creates Catwoman. It's the city that creates the Joker. And it's this observation about the origins of evil that has led many to ask, why does Batman spend all his money and time on beating up criminals when he could use his wealth to fix the system and alleviate those forces that drive people to commit crime? In the real world, Repeated studies have shown that the best way to spend money to reduce crime levels in the long term is not on law enforcement, the prison system, or even reintegration programs, but on improving neighborhoods, reducing inequality, and creating opportunity. And that's exactly what Batman does. Since the very early comics, Bruce Wayne was seen to invest heavily in programs that work to transform deprived communities. And then, as Batman, he does battle with those behind-the-scenes forces that keep people in poverty so they can prey on their desperation. There is an inevitability about crime in the Gotham stories. One never-ending task for Batman. That's also true in the Babylon stories. If there's an empire, there will be slaves. If there's a city, there is oppression somewhere. If there's any kind of pyramid, there is someone at the bottom. As we're reminded by those stories that explore the involvement of the Wayne family in the city's corrupt foundations, there is nothing pure, nothing untouched by the sin of the city. The captives in Babylon longed for their return to Jerusalem, but they also remembered how Jerusalem too was corrupt, amassing wealth and military power in the form of chariots from Egypt. God's temple built on the backs of slaves. Jerusalem, in the end, just another Babylon.
You're part of this too. How am I part of this?
Like all of us who continue to drive cars knowing what they do to the environment, who use banks that invest in the manufacture of weapons that fuel unjust and sometimes illegal warfare, the system itself is so broken that even in trying to do good, we can cause harm. The corruption of the city is absolute.
Gotham's time has come. Like Constantinople or Rome before it, the city has become a breeding ground for suffering and injustice.
So what is to be done? What is Batman's response to the evil that he sees? In Christopher Nolan's trilogy of films, Bruce Wayne is faced with the ultimate choice. The League of Shadows have seen the incurable corruption of Gotham, and they seek to excise it.
Gotham must be destroyed.
They give Bruce Wayne the opportunity to cleanse the evil that killed his parents once and for all, to destroy Gotham completely.
It should be you standing by my side, saving the world.
But he refuses. Instead, he becomes the protector of Gotham, this wicked world that caused him so much pain.
I'll be standing where I belong, between you and the people of Gotham.
He refuses to kill.
I will not become an executioner.
He recognizes that even in somewhere as corrupt as Gotham, there exists the potential for good.
Gotham isn't beyond saving. Give me more time. There are good people here.
Individuals, organizations, or governments that see themselves as on a crusade to completely rid the world of evil often end up doing more harm than good. There must always be room for redemption. This too is the conclusion of the ancient story of the city. In the book of Revelation, the symbolic Babylon is destroyed. Those dark powers overcome once and for all. The Garden of Eden is restored, but when the final destiny of Earth is revealed, it is surprisingly a city. The New Jerusalem, human efforts finally redeemed, set free from the corruption of individual and systemic sin.
I see a beautiful city and a brilliant people rising from this abyss. I see the lives for which I lay down my life, peaceful, useful, prosperous, and happy.
It's a vision like this, that another world is possible, that it is coming even now in the middle of this corrupt empire, that allows our hero to endure, serving Gotham by alleviating suffering, then entering into the fray of battle with dark forces, knowing that their days are numbered.